I would like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Elizabeth Speith. She is an amazing asset and part of our ohana here at MISC. Beth is our early detection community engagement liaison. She works with the Hawaii Invasive Species Council on statewide pest reporting and 643pest.org. She's also with our MISC Community Koki Control Program. You can learn more about that program tomorrow in our presentation, but she just loves this field and this work and our aina so much that she not only has one job, she has two jobs doing this type of work. So mahalo nui, Beth, for all the great things that you do. We're so excited to hear about 643 Pest.
So thank you guys for joining. This is just a really short, a brief talk about the importance of pest reporting, how your eyes and ears out there are so important to help us find new invasive species while we still have a window, that early detection, rapid response window to actually go out and control and eradicate these new pests. So thank you once again for joining us in the evening for this. And there's been a number of really great presentations in the this morning by Serena and her coworker Lissa, by Franny Brewer of Bisque last week, talking about invasive species in Hawaii. So I'm not actually going to talk to you guys about that, but I would like to share with you a little bit of the biology behind invasive species and how they spread once they arrive at a new place, because it plays an important role in why your reports are so important for us and why having these eyes and ears across the state looking for new organisms, plants, animals, insects in the land and sea, why it's so important. So this, you may have seen this before. This is actually a really popular graph within the invasive species set. But basically what it is showing you is when a new organism, no matter what it is, plant, insect, is introduced to an area, when it gets into an area, they'll often show a pattern of slow initial spread that becomes exponential. And then it kind of peters out once they've found all of the available, what we call ecological niches, all the places that they can live in a new environment. And as they do that, what this color, this rainbow color under here represents is it shows how over time, as these numbers increase, they cover a larger and larger area, and the cost increased and the type of ways we manage these invasive species change over that whole invasion pattern too. Now, for each of these different stages of the invasion, there are different control strategies that have priority. So the most important one is prevention. We really rely here in Hawaii on pre-border, so before things even start coming here, as well as quarantine, to make sure that we are not allowing new organisms to be introduced. So we want to stop them before they even get here. That's the absolute best thing we can do. But that doesn't always happen, as we all know. And the next best thing we can do is when there's only a few of those organisms around, that's when we have this thing called early detection and rapid response that we talk about in the invasive species world. But what that really means is we just want to find these guys when there's only a few of them around. And that's when the eradication will be simple and we can rapidly respond and go out and control these organisms. Before they start to spread and it requires more and more local control, they hit that exponential growth. That's when already eradication is usually unlikely. And then by the time they've spread to that point where they're in all of their available ecological niches, they often, at least here in Hawaii, are on multiple islands, they're throughout the state. And at that point, we have to rely on much more expensive and difficult control techniques, such as researching and introducing natural enemies of this organism from wherever it came from, or you have to rely on just controlling these organisms in local areas, in a park, on a ranch. So it becomes way more difficult. And often that requires landscape level restoration. That's very difficult to actually get right. And we often lose organisms, native organisms, during that whole process. So just to give you an idea of what a kind of window we have to actually find these new organisms, I like to share this research from the California Department of Food and Agriculture. I feel old now because it's like literally from the last century, but I think it really does still apply. We have new technologies, but there's also way more organisms moving around the planet now. So what the California Department of Food and Agriculture looked at is they looked at the amount of effort, which is this dotted line right here, how many work hours, and that's pretty much a correlative of how much money it costs. It would take to eradicate, that's what this line is, 18 different plant noxious weed species across 53 different areas in independent infestations. And what I think they were really interested in was this crossover point right here. And that shows where no matter how much effort you put in, you still are going to have a decreasing amount of success. So we're looking at 20 or less % success rate of actually eradicating these plants. And what's really fascinating about this is because not only was this important for their own internal process to make decisions about when to go after these noxious weeds by looking at the areas that they were initially infesting, but if you go back over here and look at these success rates, and if you just pick one, like 60% success rate, that's a little more than, 50-50. You're looking at 1/10 of a hectare. That's a very small area that you would have to find those organisms in. And just a note, I did borrow this from this paper, but I did add the smiley faces. That was not in the scientific paper. Now, for all of us Americans, just a better idea of what a hectare is, it's essentially a soccer field in size, which is 2 football fields. And so this is an incredibly small area. So we have to find these new organisms coming here, plants, animals, insects, super early in order to be able to have that real opportunity to rapidly respond and contain and eradicate them before they become established. And this is talking about plants. If you're talking about other organisms that move around, it becomes even more complicated. And so essentially, it's just very important that we catch them early. So you might have noticed that usually the public becomes aware of these organisms when they're already on that exponential growth. When they're starting to spread so fast, that's usually when people will start to notice them. And what we really need to do is be able to try as hard as we can to have enough observant people out looking around so that they notice when just there's a few new plants, one new lizard, we want to catch them early. Because the easiest, least expensive, and most successful control programs are those that have detected the invader early. And some of you may recognize the yellowish tone in the back of this picture. This is actually from, as you might have guessed, I'm based on Maui. And this is a picture of looking up at Haleakala Ranch at fireweed across the landscape. And on multiple islands here in Hawaii, there's many of us that looked up at our mountains and looked out on ranch lands and started to see this yellow color spreading across the landscape. And essentially, by the time we were noticing that yellow color, it was already too late for eradication for that particular species. So just to give you some examples, there's a ton of examples where people reporting what they're seeing has really helped change that invasion curve where we were able to catch them early. But I'm gonna give you a couple different examples. You may have seen this before too, but little fire ants, which are not found throughout the state. They are a relatively new invader here in Hawaii. They are considered one of the IUCN's 100 worst pests in the world. And I would suggest that if you really want to know why we don't like, or why the little fire ants are out of place here in Hawaii, go online to Spot the Ant. There's a really good documentary on YouTube. And there's going to be one presentation this week that's specifically about little fire ants here on Maui. But suffice it to say that we don't want to have our landscape covered in these little fire ants raining down from the trees and affecting our agriculture. The little fire ants, the most of them in the state, are found on Hawaiʻi Island. And then there's a lesser amount, excuse me, as you move down the island chain. Maui has several infestations. Oahu has a few. Kauai has the best going on. Their little fire ants are contained and on the road to eradication if they're not already there yet. But here on Maui, we were kind of in a similar situation to Big Island. And not only are we a little smaller, so it makes it a little easier, but we were really lucky that we had observant people in the public letting us know when they were encountering what they thought to be a new ant, or if they knew about little fire ant, they were letting us know because they said, I think this is that new ant you're talking about. So 75% of the known infestations on Maui, 9 out of 12 were found because of public reporting. And that public reporting is probably making the difference between having a chance at containing and eradicating this ant from becoming established on Maui and the situation that we're seeing over on Hawaiʻi Island, where they've already on that landscape level, where people are controlling the ants in their backyard or in parks. So another example, one thing that some people don't necessarily realize is that every single island not only has its own unique native species and endemic species, but we also have our own sets of invasive species. And the Jackson chameleon you see here on the right, which has become fairly well established throughout the state, there are two places, two islands where there are either not any Jackson chameleons, which is Kauai, they have none, or very few on Lanai. So on Kauai, they've decided they don't want to have this Jackson chameleon come over and become established. Any new vertebrate, any new bird, reptile, mammal that becomes established in an area, as well as plants, but it's very obvious with the vertebrates, they tend to change the trajectory of our environments, whether they're human modified environments or natural environments. So they are working really hard to prevent them from spreading over there. So a person observed this one Jackson chameleon right here walking along, was actually walking along the fence behind there. He called, he was able to get somebody, sent in the report. We were able to get somebody out there and they were able to catch this Jackson chameleon before it got over to a tree, went up in it, and it would have been really difficult to find in the future. And just one plant example. So it's kind of hard to see, but there's this kind of strange, stringy looking, almost like funny string in the back here in green. That is a plant called the milk rope vine. It is actually only found in one particular place in the entire state, and that's on Oahu. And someone who was spending time, it was over on Cocoa Head, they were doing their walks and they started to see this plant that they did not recognize that was overgrowing all the haulicoa, starting to grow over everything in a kind of weedy area. And so they took some pictures and they sent it in. And it took a little bit to figure out what it was because this particular plant, which is native to East Africa and Madagascar, and not even in many places around the planet, it had been planted in that area and had started to naturalize, even though that has never been seen anywhere else in the world. Well, so when we got it identified, we sent it over for a Hawaii Pacific weed risk assessment. So this is an assessment that gives us an idea of the potential invasiveness of these plants. And they gave it a score, the score is 8. That doesn't tell you a whole lot, but it's starting to veer into this is a potentially destructive plant to have in the environment. And the fact that it was naturalizing and growing over everything kind of gave us a clue of that too. And so as a result of this pest report, this vine is actually being removed from that area so that hopefully pretty soon we prevented it from going that whole invasion curve and it will no longer be planted in the state of Hawaii. So there are a lot of folks. So I'm telling you about the importance of pest reporting and you're like, okay, maybe I will be observant. Maybe I'll let people know when I see something new. So who do you tell about that? And here in Hawaii, our invasive species problem is pretty big. But we also have a team effort of a lot of different groups and agencies working on invasive species. So I just don't have everything in here. And just a shout out, if you want, if you are not represented on here, put your invasive species management group in the chat. And I'm sorry if I did not include you, but I was just giving an overview of all the different folks that work on invasive species. And they're kind of in roughly where they rank in this curve as far as those different types of control of invasive species management. So the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, they're super important for that pre-border and quarantine and even inter-island quarantine. They inspect a lot of these goods that we get from all around the world. And so they help actually do that prevention. Then if they get in, we have to have early detection. So there are groups all over the state that are either actively going out and looking, like one of my coworkers who helps coordinate a project called Mamalo Poi Poi, who is also giving a presentation this Friday at 10, which should be very interesting. But they actually do inspections and have traps. They do surveys at airports throughout the state where they're looking for a whole number of new organisms and insects that are either not in the state or only on single islands. So they're looking for things like Africanized honeybees and red imported fire ant, and seeing if things like coconut rhinoceros beetle or little fire ant are spreading. And we also have the island invasive species committees that are found throughout the state. They work a lot within this realm of that early detection and rapid response. But as things spread, we end up on this landscape level control. And that's where folks like the Department of Land and Natural Resources, the University of Hawaii, the Extension Office, the Hawaii Association of Land Partnerships, of Watershed Partnerships, there's all kinds of folks working. They all kind of have their own piece of the pie as far as what part of that invasive species management that they help with. So if you see something out there, who do you report it to? Do you call the police? Do you call the Department of Agriculture or submit it to a museum or the Department of Land and Natural Resources? It goes on. There's tons of folks who all of these folks play a role in invasive species management, and they get reports and act on them. Well, in order to make it a little less confusing, the state of Hawaii has created a pest hotline that's both a phone number, app, and online, so that you can contact one place and know that those reports are going to go out to all of these different organizations. So one place, the report's going to go to the right people that can do something about it. So there's two components to it. The 643 Pest Hotline is actually managed by the Department of Agriculture. It's a smartphone number, and when you call it, it will go to, usually it's the Department of Agriculture office that the inspectors, like Kathy Davenport right here, they answer the phone. It goes right down to the airport where the plant quarantine inspectors are. So the people that are answering the phone are very knowledgeable. They're usually entomologists. They're the people who know what's going on with invasive species, and they are from the place that you're calling. So those calls are answered by a person, usually, like I said, an inspector, for most of the day, a couple hours of the day. That does go to an answering machine. But you know that the folks that are answering those calls, they're going to be very knowledgeable about what you are reporting to them. And I can share this later. I wanted to play for you a pest reporting promotion that was done back in 2007, but I don't think they really work on the on these webinars. But I'll share that in the chat after the talk. The other component, the online component, is 643pest.org, easy to remember. They both have the same name. But it's a little confusing. This one, or not really confusing, but it's not just Department of Agriculture that helps manage this particular project. It is a partnership. It's sponsored by the Department of Land and Natural Resources and the Hawaii Invasive Species Council, which is made up of a whole bunch of different state organizations. But it really represents a partnership between a number of different agencies and groups across the state. When you send in a report to 643pest.org, there'll be specialists from multiple agencies and groups that'll assist with the identification of whatever you're reporting. If that what you're sending in a report for is still in that early detection and rapid response kind of phase of its invasion, that will be forwarded on to those agencies and groups that have the capacity for rapid response and to go out and get those organisms. And if what you're reporting is actually one of those organisms that's further along and it's on that landscape level infestation, we'll also share with you resources for management of those widespread organisms. And I always like to point out, I don't know for sure because I didn't ask him, but Governor Ike gave the iPhone app of 5 stars. So, and I just want to share with you a little bit about how to actually report these pests. It's pretty simple. You're just going to share a little bit of information so that we can contact you. And this is where the detective work starts to happen. We also want a description and a little bit of information because we need to know about what you're reporting and where it's at. So a little bit of information about the organism you're reporting, and there's a little map that you can either use your location or enter an address or take this little red marker and move it to wherever you're seeing that thing, whether it be a reef on, off a trail that you see, you can move it to wherever. And you can upload images. I will point out that we're getting a new app this year. So right now you can only upload images, but as I'll tell you in just a moment, videos are also very important for identifying these organisms. So our new app coming out this year, later this year, will have the ability to upload videos. So just a little bit about, this is the detective part of the pest reporting. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of tips about how to take pictures and how to describe these organisms so that it gives us a better chance of being able to identify what you're reporting. Now, believe it or not, even though there's all those folks working on invasive species, there's very little capacity to send people out to identify different plants and insects, especially if they're probably widespread or more common. So make sure to take a series of pictures, including flowers, seeds, and fruits. Take a picture of the whole plant so we know what kind it is and of the leaves so that we have a better chance of identifying it. Don't submit a picture, if you can, of just something from far away. This is of a vine that's off the poly that we were able to ID, but it was very difficult from an image alone. And with insects, once again, take a series of pictures, the top and bottom. Be careful, there are insects out there, so don't hurt yourself doing this. But make sure you get, because there's often things like for caterpillars, you have to have these prolegs as part of the identification. And all insects are different. So the more pictures you take, the more likely you are to take the picture that the entomologist will then be able to see and identify. You can also take images of what they're eating, like this oriental flower beetle and a papaya, or damage they've done, like this Queensland longhorn beetle, where it's created sawdust on this tree and sap. And the same thing with a coconut rhinoceros beetle boreholes. That really helps us know whether or not this coconut tree was damaged by a coconut rhinoceros beetle or by a string trimmer or a rat chewing on a leaf or something else. And it does help to have something in that picture for scale, once again, so that we know the size of it, especially for the entomologists that are working through to figure out what it is. And for most insects, if possible, without hurting yourself, a specimen really helps, because a lot of these insects, like ants, they require a microscope to actually be able to identify what they are. And I'm going to share with you after this, if you are interested, or you can contact us later, we will send out these little fire ant test kits, which are also ant ID kits if you collect an ant sample and send it in. And that's the best way to find out exactly what you're encountering out there. And one last little bit, videos are really good for vertebrates. So kokies are often heard and not seen. A lot of things like birds, they're going to move around a whole lot, and that short video will give us a lot of the clues that we need to be able to identify what you're seeing out there. And if you want to learn more, You can go on 643pest.org, click more information, and there's a number of early detection field guides. So you can see what people are looking for in different places across the state. And you can also go to your invasive species committee that's closest to you, and they'll have a list of targets so that you can get an idea and a view from when you're looking around to help us be the eyes and ears so we can find these organisms before they spread and while they still can be controlled. So thank you guys very much for joining tonight. And I don't know if there's actually any questions. You can always go to help desk at 643pest.org to get a hold of us, or go just online, and at least for my part of the organization on 643pest.org, go online, and there's many ways to get a hold of us if you have any other questions after this.
Mahalo nui, Beth. If you have a few minutes, we have a few minutes for questions. If anybody wants to enter a question in our Q&A or on our Facebook Live, you've got this amazing resource right here to answer all of your 643 pest and invasive species questions.
And if you are interested in more of the technical details of 643 Pest or the online portions and databases, we are also more than glad to spend some time and share with you some of our data that we've collected over 15 years or how it all works.
So we do have a question from our own Monty Tudor-Long with the LFA crew at NISC, and I'm so glad he asked this question because it was something that I was thinking too. What's the most exciting pest report you've gotten at 643 Pest?
You know,
I'm sure you get this question a lot.
Well, kind of. It's actually kind of sad because over the years, I think that I'll have like a kind of a window of memory of just a couple of years about what their exciting ones are. But unfortunately, the most exciting ones are the ones I can't talk about because they're the ones that there is a possible investigation on. And so for certain species like illegal reptiles or snakes, there is a legal mandate that the Department of Agriculture follows up, and it makes it cheaper for fewer people to be involved. And so if the state attorneys general gets involved, those are the most exciting ones, and they're the ones that I don't get to talk about. But occasionally it is exciting when I see them come through and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a boa constrictor or something, you know? But otherwise, the more nerdy ones were like in this past year, I found that that plant species that I shared with you, I found that one really interesting. It's literally not planted. It's not even a popular botanical garden plant. So it's not found it's found in very few places outside of Africa. But somehow in Cocoa Head on Oahu, it found a place that it was thriving and starting to spread. So that one was interesting.
Wow, that's amazing. And I mean, it sounds like it can almost be a reality show with the other, pests you were talking about that you can't talk, that you can't talk about. Definitely something to look into maybe one day if somebody can do a cool invasive species reality show.
Luckily, those are the minority though of what we hear about, and I'm hoping that's because there's not many of them in our landscape. I believe that's true, but that's the majority of what people are observing in the world around them are pests in their backyards, and so they're usually more widespread organisms. But it's a great opportunity to learn about what's in your backyard. But yeah, luckily the reality show is a little more boring than all that.
Yeah, we don't have enough episodes to make a season, so that's a good thing.
Okay.
And talking about observing things in your backyard, Miss, we do have a virtual scavenger hunt happening right now that anybody is open to play, whether you're in a conservation field or not. And one of our activities is actually going outside and observing things in your backyard and taking an inventory of them and maybe looking a little deeper and seeing something that's possibly invasive that you can report to 643 Pest. So one of those opportunities to take the lessons that Elizabeth just learned and go with it and possibly win an ohia tree. We have 3 ohia trees up for grabs in our raffle, and then everybody gets a prize as well. But yeah, mahalo nui, Beth. Couple more minutes if we have any more questions for Beth. All right. I think we have a pretty knowledgeable gang with us right now too, but mahalo nui, Beth, again for your presentation and for all the work you do. I definitely have used 643 in the 643 Pest in the past and plan on continuing to do it. And yeah, we just appreciate all the work that you're doing.